The August 25th SAT has come and gone. We're done with it. And now we're here to talk a little bit about how it went. And we're also going to address a couple bigger student broader concerns that we've seen both online and in person that we think will be helpful when it comes not only to dealing with this test, and hopefully you did well with it and hopefully you feel good about it, but also for dealing with future tests. I'm joined here today, as always, with the Hagwons SAT reading writing expert, Deanna. Hello.
Hello. Hello, hello.
And August, actually, we hope, felt a little bit easier.
Should have felt, if you've never taken it before, this was a great first exam. If you've taken May or June, you should have definitely felt like August in general was much more doable, slightly easier, maybe.
And I want to talk a little bit about this test feeling thing because I've been referring to it quite a bit about how test feels. You have a particular opinion on how students feel about tests and how they react to what they feel about a test, how their initial reaction about how they did or maybe how the test went.
Right. So often I will get, phone calls or text messages immediately as students are leaving test centers. Or even if you do a quick scroll through Reddit, you can see that students are posting questions like, this test felt really hard. I must have really screwed up. Or it actually felt really easy. Second modules felt really easy to me. I thought I did quite well in the first module. Did I do something wrong? Did I not get the upper module? Questions like that. So it's always a concern, even if it feels easy, and then it's a concern if it feels too hard. The one thing I will say is that we've been watching students walk in and out of test centers for years, across many different countries in many different situations. Usually a student's feeling of a test is not very indicative of their performance. What I mean is, how you feel after a test isn't a really good marker for how well you did or how well you didn't do on a test. Most likely, especially, I'm going to talk specifically about reading here for a little bit. If you walked out of a test center and you feel like, wow, reading was really hard, I had no idea what I was doing, it felt really difficult for me, it may have likely been that the passage was actually something quite dense, or it was written in a way that felt a little more complicated and you just struggled reading through it a little more. So it immediately gives you a little bit more panic, like, oh my gosh, am I not understanding this correctly? Am I not, understanding this quickly enough? What if I get this wrong? It's likely that anxiety and panic that's kicking in that makes it feel difficult. But it's very likely that if you did the right training and you did the right practice, you should have been able to eliminate answer choices and pick the correct answer correctly. So lots of students are able to do this. It's just the heightened test anxiety and nerves that just makes things feel much more difficult. The flipped is also true, which is some students will walk out and say, I know I did well on reading module 1. Why did I feel like module 2 was so easy? Did I not get the upper module? What did I do wrong? It's likely that the kind of passages you saw in module 2 were just structurally a little easier to walk through or read through. And also that they may have been topics that were a little easier for you to navigate through, or you were a little more familiar with. It would have likely made you feel a little more comfortable reading those passages, and things would have just felt a little calmer and a little like everything was going a lot more smoothly. So does that mean those questions were a lot easier than the questions than someone else would have seen in an upper module 2? Not at all. So don't freak out because you think it felt easy. Don't freak out because it felt too hard. It likely has no correlation with the actual score you're going to get in a week or two. They're pretty likely unrelated to each other.
And what might add to this confusion, distress, especially confusion, is a misunderstanding I think I've seen among students, online particularly, about comparing test questions and trying to determine whether or not you made the upper or the lower module. Deanna, talk to me about how even if you're in the same testing center, same time zone, you might not have the same upper and lower modules.
Yeah, I love Reddit. This is likely my least favorite part about Reddit and what students tend to do on there, which is you'll see a lot of students talk to each other and say, well, one student will say, I know I was in the upper module 2 for reading or for math. And another student will say, okay, did you see this question with these words in it, or this passage about this topic? And the first student will say, "Oh no, I didn't get that question." And the second student will immediately assume, "Oh, I must have not gotten the upper module. I must have, scored out of it. I got the lower module. I'm screwed. My score is going to not be what I want it to be or what I expected it to be." And I can tell you now that that is going to be very, very inaccurate. We have seen students walk into the exact same test center in the exact same city at the exact same grade level, walk in and have two wildly different SAT tests, but we know they walked out of the upper module for reading, writing, and math. SAT is not writing one version of a test or a question and having all of the students take it. There are multiple versions of both modules, upper and lower, and they can consist of entirely different questions. I've seen two tests be sat at the same test day, both be upper modules and not have a single question of overlap, be two entirely different tests. So that is not a very good indicator. You can't rely on that and get yourself worked up that you're going to, that you flunked this test or you did really poorly, or that somebody else did worse than you. So don't get caught up in that. Don't compare, especially if you're asking, did you see this single question with this single topic, and, freak out if another person didn't. The other thing is we're seeing that, and I'll talk about this a little later as well, SAT is writing very similar versions of, the same question using different topics. So it's likely that if you ask someone, hey, did you have a question with golden retrievers? They may have seen something similar to that question, but it wasn't about golden retrievers. It may not even have been about dogs on their end. So don't use this as a metric, and don't try to compare your test with other people to try to gauge how well you did on this test. That's usually not a very good place to start thinking about SAT.
Yeah, maybe back in the days of the paper SAT when everyone had exactly the same questions all around the world, if you were in the right time zone, this was a thing. But now that we've moved to digital age, things are a little bit different. One thing that has always remained the same, especially on the SAT, is vocabulary. Maybe the level of which has changed and fluctuated over since, but the focus on vocabulary as an important skill to hone on the SAT. Deanna, tell me about how vocabulary was on the August 2025 SAT.
Yeah. We really talked about vocab a lot on our June React video as well, and it's for good reason. I'm going to kind of recap what I said a little bit in that video as well, but there isn't another question type that I can reliably say you will see 6 to 8 questions of across the test without fail on the SAT as vocab. You will definitely see minimum 6 questions, maximum 8, sometimes 9, on a very weird test. But you'll see a lot of vocab questions. They're going to be there. In recapping August, there were a couple words that were difficult. I think attrition was a big one that a lot of students saw that were quite difficult. But other than that, in general, the level of vocabulary on August was not that difficult. If I get flack for saying that, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. What I mean, though, let me put this in quotations a little bit. What I mean by not so difficult is the level of vocabulary you saw on August is a level you should absolutely expect to see on this test. So it's not that these words are so simple and you should use them all the time, but definitely, this is a level we should be studying for. It's words like proponents of, attest to, invoke, compulsion, words like that. You may not have seen them before you study for the SAT, but yes, they will definitely be on this test. So in general, level of vocabulary, not as difficult as other tests.
And an internal concern among especially frustrated SAT vocabulary and in general vocabulary studiers throughout the world. What is random word memorization going to do for me? Because if you look anywhere about how to do the the SAT vocab, it can feel like all they're doing is throwing 500 words at you and saying, memorize these words. And then when none of them come up on test day, you think, well, what was the point of that? What was the point of that? Especially because memorization and trying to memorize definitions and parts of speech, how it's used in the sentence, that can be the most frustrating and difficult part of SAT, particularly for people with a bit of a poorer reading and writing background. Deanna, I want you to tell me about why exactly we do this, and also how we implement it in a way that might be a little more intuitive.
Yeah, so I totally understand the frustration because, even though I say you will definitely see vocab questions on the test, you never know what you're going to see on test day. And I understand the frustration students feel of like, I can memorize 2,000 words leading up to SAT test day, but I won't know which. I might see like 3 out of those 2,000 on test day, if that. I totally understand that. And one of the reason this feels so much like just hard labor is because you're kind of forcing yourself to kind of choke down on and memorize just a list of random 50, 60 words each day, and you're just forcing yourself to memorize word, part of speech definition, word, part of speech definition. So you just have kind of like, if you imagine your brain, it's like this big pool of random words just floating around, and then you come test it and you try to have to figure out and fish things out. And you feel like I know I've seen this, but I can't remember it, and I don't know where in the pool it is. It might be on the shallow end, it might be on the deep end, who knows? And you can't fish it out in time to use it on test day. So I totally understand that vocab is a really frustrating thing to try to learn. Which is actually why our vocabulary curriculum, which is absolutely free, by the way, vocabulary, our entire curriculum, none of it is locked away. If you sign up on our website, make a free account, you can use the entire curriculum. But the way I made vocabulary is that all of the words are grouped thematically. So you're going to learn words that mean or are used in a similar fashion together. And that just makes it so much easier for words to stick in your brain because they're sticking together with other words that are quite similar. And the other reason this is helpful is that you're going to start to pick up on important like roots, prefixes, suffixes, because you'll see them over and over and over again within a single theme in vocabulary without actually having to memorize the Greek Latin roots. Yes, I would love for students to sit down and memorize Greek Latin roots before they walk into an SAT, but as an instructor, I also have realistic expectations for what I know you're going to do. I know you're not going to memorize those roots. So what's better is if you thematically memorize the words, you'll pick up and you'll start to recognize groups of letters as roots and be like, oh, I think usually when I see this group of letters or this kind of part of a word, it usually meant something similar to this. And even that much information will be super helpful for you on test day. In a vocab question or even in a really difficult reading passage, because you'll just be able to navigate those words a little easier. So that's why I made vocabulary in the way. Vocabulary is like 20 different themes. It's over 1,000 words. We also have practice questions in the SAT words and context style, so you can solve SAT style vocab questions using our words. You can download flashcards. It's all on Quizlet. You can study it however you want. The entire thing is free. And I made it this way. We made it this way because we understand this frustration that students are having around vocab. The bad news is you're going to see it again September, October, November, December. The good news is we made vocabulary available for everyone. You can start. Now is the best time to start, to make sure you're not frustrated about this on another test day.
So yeah, and vocab in general, cumulative. So if you're a freshman, if you're a sophomore, even if you're a junior, start now. Start now, and you will see the fruits of your labor blossom in months' time. I want to talk a little bit more about reading and writing. You were talking about how there are a lot of science-based inference questions where they'll plug material from the sciences world, but not just random passages about space or about physics, which can be very frustrating and difficult on their own. You told me something very interesting, how they are presenting science passages in a different way that's tripping up students. Tell me more.
So this is definitely something we've seen come up before, but I think I saw it the most In the recent exams, I think I saw it the most on August 2025, which is there's two types of science passages we can see on the SAT, specifically when we're talking about inference questions or any of the evidence questions, textual and quantitative. What we can see is you can see science passages that are written about science. So those are the passages Joon just talked about, like passages that are about space, passages that are about physics, passages that are about some aspect of microbiology. They're delivering information. They almost seem like those like Britannica encyclopedia paragraphs about a certain topic. They're relaying information to you about a specific scientific topic. That's one type of passage we see. And we see those, we did see those a little bit on August, but a lot of what we saw on August, and I can see SAT moving in this direction a lot, is moving towards talking more about an experiment. So instead of giving you information on a topic and being like, this is how things are, they'll describe to you an experiment and then the results and conclusions from that study or experiment. And so what is different about those two passages, and I know students read them in very similar ways, but you do need to approach these two things very differently, or things will get very confusing to you, because likely a passage that's talking about an experiment is not asking you to understand thematically and scientifically all of the information that's being relayed or what is actually going on there. What they're really actually asking you to do is, can you differentiate between what is a hypothesis and what is a conclusion? Can you follow method and see how it relates to a result or conclusion? Those relationship between the different parts. This is in class I teach this as reading lab report parts in a passage. This is really what those questions are asking you. So it's going to be a little difficult how you should be reading answer choices if you're reading an experiment versus you're actually reading about scientific knowledge or a scientific topic. Lots of students kind of mix that up, and they're reading about an experiment but trying to understand the science behind it, and they get to the answer choices and they trip up. But likely the answer choices are asking you to compare methodology, conclusion, hypothesis, or some sort of kind of external review. So make sure you're understanding what it is the passage is actually talking about. Is it actual science, or is it a researcher or a researcher's experiment? And make sure you're bringing that mindset into reading the answer choices.
You might want to dig out that middle school scientific method flow chart. That'll be a little bit helpful to look at what's happening, the moving parts there. Not that it's just all facts. There's a method, there's a process. Now to talk about math. Math is one of those things where they don't really change what they talk about or how they present it. And on the SAT, we've talked about math a lot. We're going to talk about the same things again. And as always, the most difficult questions on math are in geometry. They're with circles, tangents. Deanna, tell me a little bit more about math.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I'm gonna kind of add writing into this conversation as well, just a little bit, which is writing and math. The most difficult questions are the exact same kind of questions every test. So it's, if you're struggling with any of those, we really, you can expect what will be difficult. It's really, maybe we didn't prepare the right things. With writing, it's usually certain punctuation questions or transition questions. With math, it's always geometry. And the reason for that is I think geometry is just one of those things that is really easy or nice for SAT to elevate the difficulty of. And what I mean by that, it's really easy for them to give you a basic version of that geometry topic in a Blue Book practice test or on the College Board educator question bank, or even on the Khan Academy questions. So you feel like you'll do those questions and think, I understand this topic, I understand this theorem, I know this formula, and then be able to walk into the test center and be like, oh yeah, I'm giving you the exact same topic, but I'm putting it in a context that's a lot more sophisticated and a lot more difficult than you've experienced previously on any of our other content. They'll put together many different, what we're seeing is they'll put together different types of topics in geometry. They might put You might have one question about tangent lines, one question about circles, and then you'll suddenly on test day get a question with circles and tangent lines. And it's the same topic, same theorem, same ideas, but now they've kind of put it in a much more elevated situation that's just a lot more difficult for you to navigate if your actual base understanding of geometry is not so strong. Same goes for triangles. So triangles and circles are one of those things that just get a lot more difficult on test day. I'm going to repeat what I've been saying for the last year and telling people for much longer than that in real life. But if you really want to hit 780 plus, 770 plus even on SAT math, you have to master geometry. The best place to do that is the geometry textbooks at school. So all of the information is already there. They're actually even a little more difficult than the questions you might see on SAT. Make sure you can solve those upper level geometry, circle and triangle questions in your geometry textbooks. You'll likely be able to find them at school without any additional cost, without having to buy new practice books or practice questions. Make sure you're very comfortable with those, and then you should be fine on the math section. Definitely Desmos helps, definitely memorizing formulas help, but go back to your original geometry textbooks. I know they're a pain in the butt, but if your goal is 780 plus on math, we got to do it.
I always like to tell my students about how if you can solve an angles question with 2 parallel lines and 1 line going down the middle, you should be able to do it with 4 parallel lines and 2 lines. Somehow you expand it just a little bit, the brains turn to mush. Please practice. I'm going to put a small plug for the Hagwon's SAT question bank. So if you're running out of practice questions, we have a tool where you can specifically filter for specifically math geometry questions. We'll just give you 4, 5, 6, how many ever you want of them. Quick plug. You don't have to do it, but we think it'll help. Lastly, we're usually at this point on one of our React recap videos, we'll talk about if you should retake for the next test, when you should retake, considerations going into that. We're not going to do that actually this video because this fall in 2025, kind of unprecedented. We have 3 tests, 4, is it even, in a row? Yeah, every single month. And that's just not something that we usually have. But because we have so many test options, I think it can be overwhelming for students. I think some of you guys might be looking at these bunch of tests and thinking, oh, I'm just going to shotgun all of them, whatever. One of them, surely I have to do well. No, please do not do that. Please be targeted with your test attempts. We'll tell you more about it, but you'll have to stay tuned. We have a video coming up. We'll talk to you about whether you're a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, a senior, when you should take your next SAT. If you do plan to retake, and hopefully you don't have to, hopefully you crushed August, but that'll be coming up. If you're watching this in the future, it should already be out. There should be a pop-up on screen and a big link in the description. But for now, I think that's it from us.
Yeah. Good. Good work on August. Hopefully the rest of fall, if you have to take it again, rest of fall will be just as fruitful, if not more. And we'll be back with a lot more helpful content for the rest of this entire fall semester. So keep your eyeballs peeled.
And on this channel, you might see some other content coming up. Yes, that'll also be on the channel now, but also we'll be doing these every now and then. So stay tuned. Also, you might be wondering why we're not in the same room.
Yeah, well, maybe an explanation for that will come up very, very soon. Yeah.
Well, we'll see you then. Good luck with August. May the odds be ever in your favor. Video coming up on September, November, December, which one October you should take. But for now, that's all from us. And we're here to say bye. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.